My job is to help create a mindset that we will all be able to follow through the rest of the day. Now, I will hopefully not be awake until 3 a.m., but as you progress through the rest of the segments, I want to help shape the way you look at things the way I have. So really quickly, a little background, and then beyond that, we can go back to a few talking points. But this is pertinent, right? Because our experience shapes the way we see the world. For about 10, 15 years before I reskilled into the smart city space in public sector technology, I was split between two fields. By day, I was in construction, super simple. Don't need to explain that one too much, but that helped me develop a real love for form and function, which will come into play here momentarily. But by night, I had probably one of the most unique backgrounds that I've ever seen in the public sector, which was I made video games. This is important because, again, this background shaped how I entered the smart city space and how I view a lot of what we're going to talk about today in terms of citizen centricity and designing for success, right? So where I believe that the best of intentions often still go awry, I do believe there's a way to circumvent that. And that is the point of what we're going to discuss today as we move into several topics. I won't focus on the game background too much, but I want to bring up three things that it taught me that are going to lead into this story. And I'll tell you about how I got into smart cities, and the impetus of my research leading into all of this was citizen engagement. It was leading into clear communication channels, all of that to come with this first half of the story. But where in construction, and this is true of urban planning as well, you're largely limited. What you can do is based on time, money, resources, availability. And it comes down into very practical terms a lot of times. But in digital technologies, and this is only going to become more true, is there are no limitations on what you can create. As we begin to talk about emerging technologies such as AI, digital twins, metaverse initiatives, immersive for public sector, the bars held, if you will, are relinquishing. And that's an important caveat, because where we used to be able to get away with saying, well, this is the way it is because it is, we don't have that luxury anymore. And that's a major component of what I want to talk to you about today. But the part that I really fell in love with in game design that brought me into smart cities is this idea of behavioral design. When I began my master's program and I was introduced to smart cities, I was a National Science Foundation fellow in citizen-centered smart cities and smart living. National Science Foundation is a big research institution for those unfamiliar in the United States. My thesis, I wanted to explore how we carry people through the journey. When you create a game, you have to have a mechanism by which they understand the rules of the situation and it carries them from point A to point B. And in cities, we have that to a varying degree, but we rely very heavily on what I would call punitive design. You drive here. If you don't drive here, you're fined. If you don't respect the fine, you go to jail. That is really the only moniker by which we have, or the modality, if you will, to influence behavior in cities. And I became really fascinated with this idea of incentivization, of behavioral psychology. And is there a way to influence behavior through incentivization in different forms? But what happened, and I'll make the story as short as I can so we can get into some good talking points. But I approached, let me backtrack and say, I had the opportunity to select any subject I wanted to, but I wanted to work on a problem that was very pertinent. So I approached our local municipal planning organization. In the United States, any metropolis area of a certain population is required to have an MPO, or municipal planning organization. These are entities that plan across the various cities around traffic, mobility, air quality, anything that affects more than one jurisdiction. I approached them and I said, hey, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing, but I want to work on a problem that you've identified. I want to work on something that is timely and relevant. And they gave me the top three things. So in reverse order, the third was affordable housing. Unsurprisingly, that's something that I think a lot of places are dealing with right now. Number two will be even less surprising. It was homelessness. And those two are different because there's a few more factors that go into being unhoused than just the house itself. But the number one, let me get some engagement here. Let me drop into the chat. What do you think number one was? Who has any idea what the number one problem that they wanted me to look at was? I won't actually wait for too many responses, but get people thinking. Let's make it fun.
I'm thinking let's give the audience a minute to think about that one, Jake. Yeah, and
I can
in the
do that.
meantime, I would be interested in hearing, just for a Nordic context, the structure, the demographics of the area you're working in, and it's quite different because I know that the Phoenix area is a very big metropolis, and then you have this structure of towns or cities that build
Yes.
tell me about this structure, because it's quite, in a Nordic context, it's quite different from what we see here. I mean, a big city in Norway is 100,000 inhabitants. How does it look on your side?
Yeah, so we're 5.5 million. So the greater Phoenix Metro, 5.5 million people, and that's across roughly 24 different jurisdictions. And you're right, Bjarte. So this is important context. All of these jurisdictions are managed and run completely separately with their own mayors, their own city councils, their own completely unique sets of governance. Now, here in the States, of course, we have the states, we have that level as well, but largely the cities are independent. And that's going to be an important factor when we talk about communication, because if you have 24 different towns and cities on different softwares, that's going to create a problem for effective communication with residents. Because again, I may live within the dotted lines of this jurisdiction, but that does not mean, or excuse me, the governance may exist within those dotted lines, but I do not, right? I may live in the city of Mesa, which is where I'm from, but 5 minutes west of me is another city, and 5 minutes north of me is another city, and we all share these boundaries.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's yeah, as I said, quite different from how it looks, but it creates challenges, doesn't it? Having these big cities in the even bigger city.
It
Okay, we have
does.
some answers on the chat, Jake, and what you're getting at may be that the actual citizen
It is.
engagement is a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, this was a bit of a guess what I'm thinking question, right? I mean, the whole
Yeah.
segment of the next 3 hours is that, but it was citizen engagement. And the follow-up question is why? And I won't wait for responses on this one, but I do want you to think about that. Why would citizen engagement trump everything else that a local government would have to deal with? Now, the answer from our perspective was really simple. It doesn't matter what you plan if it fails at the ballot. So again, to the subject and title of today's plan, the best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. Now, what had happened with our local MPO is that they would spend years developing affordable housing plans. They would spend years planning new highways. They would spend decades planning new initiatives, only to put them on the ballot and have them voted no. Now, that creates a bit of a problem for advancing any type of citizen-centered initiative. So the question came up, how do we fix this problem? Now, I'll start to dive into a few of the specific points here as well, but they would engage to the degree that they thought they could. Now, so you talked about the size difference, right? A lot of what I want to talk about is how we've done things versus how we do things and how things will be from now, because that's really what this comes down to in a lot of instances. But I like to think of the town hall, right? So a lot of our governance structure is based on how we would all used to come together and discuss issues, which is simply not reliable, or excuse me, not feasible. So for a town like ours, 5.5 million people, there's no place on earth where we're all going to get together and have a meaningful conversation. Now, when you start to add in different types of technologies, different policies, different barriers, if you will, to engagement and behavior, you develop a scenario where very few people are engaging. So the analogy that I like to say is if anyone's heard of finding the needle in the haystack, I think dealing with local government can be a lot like finding the hay in the needle stack. It's a very painful process to try and find the one nugget that you're looking for. And I have a lot to jump on that specific point. But Bjarte, let's dive into a couple of these single points, right? So the idea over the last 5 years, I've been researching this idea of citizen engagement. And like a lot of the larger wicked problems, if you will, there's not a single solution to a lot of them. There's a lot of reasons why people don't engage. There's a lot of reasons why communications don't reach the final destination. But we're going to talk about a few today that we do have control over. Excuse me. The first that I want to start about is this idea of citizen-centered approaches are no longer just a good idea. They're an expectation now in today's digital age. One of the problems that we have locally, and I'm going to put this anecdotally, because as you mentioned about it, the way we do things here in the States is different from, I mean, everywhere. There's overlap, but as just in our time together speaking, we've seen differences in how you navigate these circles. But one of the things we love to do locally is with big cities come big IT departments. And with big IT departments, they want to go in and kind of create their own tools. The reality that I found is you're not going to out Amazon. When we're trying to create a citizen-centered experience, we will not create the next Discord or Slack or Facebook. None of those tools that our citizens use are we going to create better. We look for ways to partner. We look for ways to work with those that do it well. And the reason I bring this up is when I was referring to my background, what we found is Governments have the luxury of saying because I said so in a way that private industry doesn't, right? If you don't want to play my game or you don't want to buy my product, you go somewhere else. If I don't like the local HOA or the municipal code, it's not exactly as easy to just get up and move, right? To vote with my feet, if you will. So there's a lot of things that citizens do out of necessity that are not necessarily passive acceptance. Dealing with it and living by the status quo does not mean satisfied with the current offering. And that's another important caveat for today's discussion. Your residents are becoming increasingly used to the best that digital services have to offer. Whether, again, that's the Amazon example, whether that's communicating through Slack or Discord or social media. And when they go and have to do a 6-month code permit or whatever the case may be, that's a point of friction. And friction creates disengagement. So now in our local environment, when they were looking at how to, do the affordable housing, they're spending months and they're working with researchers, but they're not asking the neighborhoods. So at the end of the day, they're coming in, they're saying, hey, let's build this here. It goes to the ballot and they say no. Well, guess who wasn't at the table when they were planning for this? Now, one of the things we went to is they did have a traditional town hall structure. And me and my colleagues went because this was a big subject of our research. And I want to say in the entire evening, there was about 13 people that came. And we talk with them about digital surveys, and they say, wow, we had about 1,200 people. That was a fantastic statistic for them. Now, depending on the size and context of your city, of how many residents you have, maybe that is a good number. But for us, that's less than 1%. So I'll ask the question, is less than 1% a statistically significant number of residents to base decisions on? And the answer, of course, is no. Now, we had one really interesting use case that came. Just north of me, one of the adjoining municipalities is called the City of Scottsdale. It developed a reputation for being very anti-development. The reality, however, wasn't. What happened is the city was concerned that all of the local institutions to buy and shop were actually south of the border. So if you wanted groceries, clothing, whatever it is you would shop for, you'd have to go to a different town. And that had a big economic impact on the city. But every time they tried to build within the city of Scottsdale, it was voted no. From a design thinking perspective, they brought in an agency a lot like ours, and they did this fascinating research. They went around and they asked the citizens. They stood outside of grocery stores, they stood outside of laundromats, and they said, hey, why don't you want things built here? And the answer was, we do. We don't want to drive 20 minutes to buy our groceries. We don't want to go, 20 minutes for the laundromat, but we don't want to lose our identity. And all the developers that come in have this grandiose plan to advance and modernize who we are, and we don't want to lose that. And I think this is very distinctive of everywhere. I mean, frankly, across the world, every city has its own distinct flavor and culture. And if you lose that, that's a semblance of why you live where you live. Now, what they did is they gathered all that feedback and they presented it back. And I'll jump to the conclusion. After that research project, after listening to the citizens and after presenting it back, so two-way communication. So Beatka says, hey, I don't want to lose my culture. I then put that back out and I say, here, here's the results of what we found. You want X, Y, and Z. They had the first unanimous vote for a development in the city's history. Now, we're a fairly young city, but nonetheless, the first time everyone was able to rally together, and it came from the voice of the citizens. Now, one interesting caveat to that story that I found really interesting is a problem that we find in these communications channels. When you do have that 1%, we found that it's often the same squeaky wheel. In this particular instance, there was one neighborhood leading the charge and creating the sensation of anti-development. When they communicated the results back, that individual realized that their confirmation bias, right? We talk about biases a lot well, frankly, everywhere, but we don't always talk about the associative bias. When we communicated back and said, well, actually, X% of the city does want this, that person realized they don't really speak for the community as much as they thought they did. And they were able to rally these voices together in such a way that led to some pretty substantial change. And since then, they now have a governing body that allows the citizen input to influence the way they develop and the way they build in much of their community programming. So great success story. So we began looking at that and saying, what enabled this? And part of it was this digitalization. Now, that's not all we do at necessarily the Connective. I really specifically come in where I design for people, not systems. And I think that's something that we forget. I'll reference a lot of recent analogies because we just had Innocode here locally, and we had the chance to talk with a few people. Um, But in the realm of smart cities, the only actual argument I've had with someone was this idea of what comes first, people or infrastructure. And it was really fascinating because the hill they wanted to die on was if you build it, the citizens will fall in line. And I was just so perturbed by that idea because A, that's not true. We can plan for the best for our abilities, but we cannot force behavior. We can punish it as much as we want, but ultimately that is not the way we endear the public to what we want to do. And this is, again, to my previous point, such a fascinating area for me, but there's a way to do this that builds transparency, trust, and just a stronger relationship with the residents. So the example, I think one's obvious. With cars, you can say, hey, you have to drive in this lane, right? You have to turn, you have to, brake, you can't run the red light. It's very easy to set restrictions. But can you force someone to your town hall? Can you say you have to come to this? You have to participate? And the answer is no. And this comes back to this idea again that are we building systems and trying to force the people into them? Or are we looking at our people and building systems that accommodate the way that they really live their lives? And my favorite examples of this is the town hall. We referenced this just a little bit earlier, but when we look at a town hall system, in today's day and age, and again, I don't know how everyone does this. Maybe this is a unique euphemism here for me in the States, but we do this because we have. Everyone gathers together in a room at 7 p.m. on Friday night because that's the way we've always done it. The reality today is, my kids are doing it in Minecraft. They're making their biggest choices via the metaverse. We're getting our information from Facebook and TikTok and other sources. We are communicating via different means. And the reality of getting together, not only from physical restrictions, but from psychographic as well, are we meeting our citizens where they stand? Or are we forcing them to conform to the system that benefits us as a city? And this is something that I really want to drive home. And we can riff on this as much as you like, but that is the leading with the end. The most important thing that I can leave us on here is as you listen to these examples of building communications channels, are you designing for citizen success, or are you building for the processes that you currently have, right? Again, governments have the advantage of saying, because I said so. And if there's no alternative, there's really only so much we can do. But is that the best way to endear the public? Is that the best way to build long-term relationships, monthly active users? Not to list like software type stats, but how do we get people truly engaged for the long term and in a way that really benefits society? I'm actually
Jake,
going to pause here. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, yeah. I'm just interested in because you are touching upon communication channels. You are touching upon this term citizen centric, and it's quite a popular term, and it's quite a problematic term at the same time because we can't really change the way we communicate in many cities to actually fulfill this dream of the citizen centric. I feel. I know you have a concrete project lined up for the valley, they call it. What is the valley, by the way? Could you explain?
Sure,
You did an
absolutely.
intro on this, yeah.
Bit of a term of endearment. So where we are in the greater Phoenix area, we are actually a valley, so surrounded entirely by mountains. So when we refer to the greater Phoenix region, we sometimes affectionately call it the valley. So something that we have been working on is the Valley app. I'm going to compare and contrast because Innocode was not the first provider that we went for this. In fact, they weren't the second, third, or fourth. It took us quite some time to find a solution that we felt really met the need of what we were looking for. So I'm going to start with a counterexample. One of the entities that we spoke with was actually a local university, and they have an application that they use where all of their students, an app that all of their students utilize for a host of different activities. And when they came to us and they said they want to use this for a local government level, they said, look how many users we have. Everyone's using this. And I said, yes, because they have to. They're not even allowed to go into the classroom until they log in via the app. We don't have that luxury. I can't force people to scan in and say hello via something. So that wasn't a moniker that we could look at. And so to get to your question, Beata, in terms of how we did this differently, I wanted to set that kind of as the structure. Again, this idea that people have the right to choose and we have to meet them where we are, right? So what we developed was, we had to meet them where they were. We had to meet them where they stand. And a few examples of that as well is Morten with Innocode was here with us recently, and we were speaking with one of our local municipalities. We were talking about what we wanted to achieve. So not necessarily the product at Innocode's level, but the Connective, what we're trying to achieve. I hinted at it very early, which was as an entity, we try to create a regional experience. So let me tell you what we have currently. I live in what's called the city of Mesa. The city of Mesa has 3 applications that we use for different things on our phone. It also has about half a dozen portals for different bills and other, activities. And then it has the website and Facebook and every other social media thing you can think of. In summary, I have about 12 different points of contact that I have to utilize to engage with my city. If Mesa is going to listen to this or sees the recording, I'm sorry, but as a resident, this is a point of friction. And if you want people to engage with you and use your products, friction is not the way to get them there, right? Couple that times 24. If every single city in the area, so say I live in Mesa, but I work in Phoenix and I go to the parks in Gilbert, how many apps do you expect me to have on my phone? Realistically, do you expect me to use them? The answer is no. Anyone in this room should not question that. No one in their right mind is going to expect meaningful engagement from such a disparate source of communication, right? So what we wanted from the Connective's perspective was, could we create a system that brings everyone together? Could I see how dense and busy the parks were around me at a geographic level, independent of city boundaries? I can walk 20 feet and be in a different city, so I don't really care about that border. And here's a really good use case. So when we talked about this, it's not communications necessarily, but we'll tie it back in. They were creating mobility routes. Well, the city wanted people to shop from the stores that were in their city. Well, for folks like me that live on the border, I don't really want to take a bus 5 miles east. I want to walk 3 minutes west and go to the closest grocery store. But as a city, we're thinking about what corresponds to us. So, to your question, what a citizen-centered means, it means taking off your city hat and remembering what it's like to be a resident, meaning what is it really like to live, work, and play, and what's meaningful to you, because those goals don't always align with the processes that we demand in local government. And that's what we sought out to create with the Valley app, was, could we bridge this communication that brings the important subjects to the user based on their interests and their geography, not necessarily the cities, because what's important to me isn't necessarily what you came up with that afternoon. Which brings me to another question. So, Beata, you would ask me this one, but who ultimately holds the responsibility for information reaching the audience, right? Here is the last thing on earth I ever want to hear from a city. We posted it on the website. Let me pause on this one for a minute. I asked ChatGPT a few days ago how many web pages were on my city's website, and the answer was over 14,000. So if you tell me, well, we posted it on the website, that really means very little for me. And one other example too, because this one happened really recently, but I was scrolling Facebook and I found this really cool activity at the library for our kids. For reference, our kids are 6, 6, and 4. I texted it to my wife and I said, hey, this would be fun, we should go. And she said, yeah, that would be great if it wasn't 2 weeks ago. The reality is that many of our communications channels do not meet people in the time and place that they need and want it, right? Facebook does not prioritize the wants and needs of residents. The website is that needle in a haystack circumstance. So finding a methodology by which you can create opportune and timely information is paramount. Now, I'll give one very practical example. Here locally, we have what's called no burn days. So in the desert, we have not a pollution like smog problem. We have a lot of dust, which results in particulate level 10 matter. So how much of that's in the air is really important. So for all you city nerds, maybe this is really relevant in terms of air quality and municipal planning. But every once in a while, when it's really bad, they have to initiate what's called a no burn day, which means no wood, charcoal, any type of fire or burning. Well, how am I supposed to know? Where do I find that information? And I asked the audience, and you don't have to put this in the chat unless you've got a really fun example, feel free to. But when you wake up in the morning and decide to do something, is the first thing you do check the city website if you're allowed to do it? I mean, my guess is probably not. So if for me as a city leader, that's important, it is incumbent on me to ensure that that gets to the resident, right? Because if we say, hey, it was posted on a sticky note in a loo, 3 streets over, the likelihood of finding that is so minimal that we cannot place the responsibility on our residents. Now, this is an interesting one because I work with another partner that had a great example of how this communication barrier occurs, and another example that it creates. So while the focus of today will be on creating very meaningful communications channels, I want to give you an example of why they're important. There's a global provider we work with called Sand Technologies, and just last month they did a citizen survey of the use of artificial intelligence in local municipalities. And the reason I bring this up is because there was one major takeaway that I saw. 2/3 of those that replied said they think AI will help municipal government run better. The same 2/3 don't believe the government will do it right. Why? I believe that there is a trust factor. Now, locally, I can speak to what we've done, right? Denny, I appreciate the enthusiastic nod because yes, it's absolutely true. If we are not communicating what we're doing, at least again, speaking from my own personal opinion of what we see locally, the residents will fill in the blanks. If you don't adequately communicate what you're doing, the residents will fill in the blanks, often with worst case scenario. I want to repeat that. When we are not transparent, your residents will fill in the blank, often with worst case scenario. What does that do for your affordable housing plans? What does that do for your citizen engagement? What does that do for any initiative that you are trying to create? It creates a panic storm where they fight against you sheerly because they don't understand what you're trying to do.
Jake,
So you would,
actually,
yeah, please.
I want to bring in Dennis really quickly too here, because you are talking about engaging in channels that are sort of built on high level stuff, and I know Dennis that you have some thoughts on this that you're bringing up later today, but I thought I'd bring you in really quickly too, because you have a lot of experience when it comes to creating this surface, meeting the citizen with totally different needs than Jake, of course. But you mentioned something in the chat here too, Dennis, that I'd like you to talk about a little bit.
No, I mean, I was really enthusiastically nodding to what Jake is sharing because, like, it's different context, but they're pretty much the same idea. So you could not force people to adopt whatever digital solution is unless it really brings value. And on the data operator side, I've seen a brilliant example last year with colleagues from the Flanders region when the to avoid all this bureaucracy or resistance, they come up with a brilliant idea. They defined they both have some private data operators, city-owned data operators, and then they create a innovation company which basically makes the following: as soon as you need a new process or new service to be provided, they identify whether they have all the data in place or they need to retrieve some more through API from either operators. Then they build the full workflow, and that's it. And that only works when you could clearly look into how you navigate that stuff. And as probably second point here would be, I had a discussion with in a Greater London Authority last year, and there was a brilliant point that you could do the data transformation without digital transformation in a nutshell. So you could analyze what you have, but you are completely doomed with the digital transformation unless you have then done your data transformation before that. So in that point, this is really a critical one. And this what Jake is sharing totally like resonates.
Happy to hear that, Dennis. So Jake, we are starting to come up to some sort of a conclusion here, but when it comes to, I mean, the whole engagement thing, you know, I have opinions, and I know you have opinions, but in short, what do you think if towns and cities in the Nordics and in Europe should rethink the whole sort of thought of engagement? What would be your sort of practical starting point to that?
No, it is a loaded question, so I'll probably work by way of example what we're doing as well. But I will pause and say the barriers are quite a few, right? So let's kind of dive into that to start with that answer. Locally, friction is the biggest one. If you give me a reason to not do it, I will, right? The more reasons you give me to not do this, we will. And one of those that we see, and I'll give you some very tangible examples of what we're doing, is in the form of surveys. I think most cities, at least here locally, next week I'm going to be in Texas at what's called the Smart Cities Connect conference, and the entire theme is citizen engagement and surveys. I am the only person there talking about how to engage with citizens that doesn't include a survey. It'll be very fun to be the odd man out once again. But what I found is, here's one local example. We have a train that we call the light rail, and there is a QR code. Well, I went to scan it, and not only do I have low bandwidth and low mobility, but then on the website end, it wasn't optimized. So it takes probably 20 minutes just for the stupid website to load. Once it does, I'm then faced with a 30-minute survey. Does anyone have any guesses what the response rate to that survey was? A clue, it wasn't very high. So the more we introduce these points of friction, the less people are going to engage. So for example, one of the areas where we wanted to adopt a solution to resolve that was looking for ways where we could eliminate that. Now, one example is survey effectiveness is going down largely, at least in the United States overall. So if you work with companies like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, you're seeing that at large, data showing that people are getting survey fatigue. We're replying less and less, and if we do, it's 1 or 2 questions maximum. So one of the projects that we initiated here at the Connective was gesture-based surveys, micro surveys. So at the train stop, instead of asking for a 30-minute survey, what are we trying to find out? Did you come from outside of Mesa to shop here today? Or, were you satisfied with your service? Give me a thumbs up. Sorry, you couldn't see that. Give me a thumbs up. And using machine learning, we can at least get something from them, right? Because from a behavioral psychology point of view, if you wave at me, chances are I wave back. So if you ask me to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, it takes very little energy for me to do that. And at least you have something. So people often ask me, well, does that tell me why they answered the way they did or not? No, but it's up to you. So speaking of data operators, to go through your own data analysis and start to answer those questions. But something's better than nothing. Another one that we're working on is, of course, is this Valley app. So in terms of engagement, again, it comes back to friction. I am used to having the most advanced digital technology at my fingertips. And when it comes to working at a municipal government level or even at our state level, it's not there. So one of the first things that I brought up was, are you the best person, for this job? And I do love a lot of the projects that we've come up with, but one example that we have is a local city had a parking app that just doesn't work, but they refuse to look at a different solution. So that what they're trying to say is, hey, we did this and now you have to use it. Well, no, I don't. No, I don't. I will find a third-party provider that does it better. So are you meeting your citizens where they are? Are you creating the best solution for the need? And of course, the last one is this idea of meeting people where they live, work, and play. The town hall example is my favorite because we have a local city called Avondale where we're exploring the potential of doing our town halls via the metaverse, not only because it allows them to dial in independent of geography, but because roughly 95% of youth in our part of town, that's their methodology for communication. That's where they engage. And are we going to say in 50 years, hey, you have to pay your water bill by, this portal with the password? Or are we going to say, hey, this is where people are? We need to bring municipal services to people, not force people to municipal services. And that's where I would start. Whether it's communication or any other thing that you try to plan, create, or design for local government, are you trying to fit the system, or are you fitting the system to your people?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Jake. We do have a question here because, I mean, usually what we hear from cities and municipalities is that, of course, we can't get our citizens to engaged. But the question is, do you feel, Jake, that people don't want to engage, or don't have the energy or the the engagement to engage? I mean, what we see usually is that in these sort of town hall meetings or digital platforms, sort of engagement platforms, we see the same groups engaging again and again.
Yes.
There's a certain demographic that tend to have the time, have the energy, have the engagement to actually share their opinions. What's your feeling? Do the broader population, the broader citizen base, they don't care, or why can't we get them to speak their mind?
I'm glad you asked that because in my notes, I had an example of that too, which is this idea that if people aren't participating, it means that that's, their interest. I think we try to fill in the blank as to what the actual intentions are. But to the Scottsdale example, we believed that they were anti-development. Well, what it really was is they were anti-losing their own culture, right? And the only way to find that out is to ask them. So for personally, to address your question very specifically, I'd love to engage, but I also don't have the time or resources to go through that type of pain. It is a very hard process to engage at a local level here, at least in my region. It's very hard to have your voice listened to. And even if they do listen to you, it's very hard to see tangible results from that due to lack of transparency. So in that initial example, the two-way feedback was really the solution to that. It's showing that, yes, we heard you, and B, we're feeding back what the results of that are. I don't think people want to be disengaged. I think people would love to know more about what's going on in the community. But when we create a system of negative reinforcement, you're only going to put your hand on the stove so many times until you stop trying. You're only going to come to council meetings and be ignored so many times until you stop going. You're only going to comment on Facebook only to have the city delete your comments, personal example, so many times, right? So to what degree are we creating an ecosystem that encourages participation? And this goes full circle to why I wanted to start with my background on this, is incentivization, right? If all we're focused on is punitive, we're never going to create the incentives that create a desire for people to come and meet us where we are as well. But we need to create systems that encourage participation, not punish it.
I'm thinking you're saying I can't even say the word. It's too hard. What are you saying?
Sorry, incentivization, providing incentives.
Incentivization. Here we go. Here we go. I'm thinking, what can an incentive be for the citizen? And we see when we work with channels and cities, we see that the content, the digital content, the local content in itself can actually be an incentive to take part of a channel
Absolutely right.
of a communication stream. I mean, you can't build a communication stream based on engagement only, because there are only so many. So we see that, okay, if we can build the incentive of high interest content to build this channel somewhere you want to be, it's a bit like, as you say, gamification or social media. You build this sort of, this, not an addiction, but this is where I find everything local. That's an incentive for me to take part of this, and then you can put this, maybe this more sort of a boring municipal stuff on top of that sometimes. So I mean, because you can't really expect people to engage in on a daily basis in municipal
Right.
services and politics. Yeah, you need to put something else in the mix, I think. Dennis, I know
Yeah.
you've been working in a very tough time for the city, that even you've had the energy and the time to work with citizen engagement quite actively. Would you tell us something about that?
No, I would say on contrary, uh, when you have the purpose, when you have the channel, people has been engaged. I'll give you one brilliant example. We had arranged or revamp all the bomb shelters, and people were hiding there during the missile drone attacks. And then we come out with a partnership with the telecom companies to make sure that we have Wi-Fi connectivity in all shelters. So imagine the people are sitting in a bomb shelter, waiting when the air raid alarm will be over. And what they're doing, they're voting through the app for the renaming of the streets, so they will not bear the names of the former Soviet uh, guys, or they vote for creation of a future of a new kindergarten close to the home, etc. etc. So people were super active, and again, probably it's a way of probably coping with stress or doing something meaningful to keep country alive. But still, if you have the way, people will be engaged, and if they don't find any, as Jake put, if they don't find any excuses not to do something, be more than willing to cooperate.
Björn, I'll give you a local example because we don't have near the necessity that Dennis was just referring to. What a phenomenal example of value at time and need, right? Meeting time and place. Well, we don't certainly have that conflict. You are looking for things of value to them. So one example is we were speaking with the city of Phoenix is the largest. They have 1.5 million residents, very, very large geography. For reference, if anyone's familiar with New York City, we're 10 times larger in terms of square kilometers than New York City. Just this huge, vast geographic area, which is the American Southwest. If you find a issue, like let's say a stop sign is out, or excuse me, a street light or a pothole, we were speaking with their IT department about their 311 app. Well, two things are true of 311 apps. A, people with time are the ones that use them. right, as compared to, say, the whole populace. So you're going to have a concentration of people largely in the affluent areas that are at home with nothing better to do than to bitch and moan about what's wrong with their city, right? So you're going to have a very concentration. Again, it's very early in the morning, so if I speak awry, I apologize. But the other one too is, how often are you actually on a 311 application? How often are you actually reporting a problem that you see as compared to some kind of meaningful information? So if, for example, we spoke with them, you had a calendar of events, I was looking for library events. I'm looking for city resources for my children. That's what I'm going to look at. So if that was nearby, the pathway to use it is far simpler, right? A real popular one, I don't know if pickleball has become big over where you're at as well, but it's nothing short of heroin in terms of addiction here. Pickleball is just the new thing in terms of what everyone's doing. People want to know where the courts are. They don't care if city A manages it or city B, they just want to know where the court is. So are you providing value to that individual independent of, again, these kind of city restrictions, these invisible restrictions that we put on people due to policy, or are we providing a value? Now, I'll give you one concrete example of that, which is one time I did actually call in to report an issue with the street, and their answer was, oh, that's not our jurisdiction. You'll have to call so-and-so. I am not going to call 5 people to figure out whose problem this is. I am doing a courtesy informing you that I found an issue. I am not going to dance through hoops. So again, friction. But what are you putting together? What are you creating? What reason do people have to come and check, view this, right? I remember an example that we had from you all was, where's the snowplow, right? When is my street going to be cleared off? For us, it's, will my tires explode because the pavement's so hot? It was already 32 degrees last week Celsius. So we have a very different problem than snowplows. But what is that timely relevant information? So one that we're creating right now is an advisory of, hey, don't go to the parks. It is extremely hot and your children will be burned on that playground equipment. Or let's go back 5 years. This park's really populated, COVID. How about this one? It's empty. Check that out instead. That is a value to parents that's very meaningful and very tangible that you as a city can do for next to nothing, right? You're just communicating availability. You have one little IoT sensor that can detect that kind of traffic. Or again, coming out of the bathroom, do I really want to push the button that says the public restroom's dirty? No one touches those. So can I do something different? Do I have an application that lets me, integrate with Parks and Rec in a meaningful way? Can I flag for safety? Can I inform that there's a problem? What are you providing me as an incentive to come to this platform? Sometimes it will be what's important to you. Sometimes it won't be. It'll be what's important to me. But at the end of the day, I think one value that we underestimate is the convenience factor that we have developed in the modern age, right? If I go on Amazon.com, I click one button, the thing shows up 2 hours later. I have a certain level of service expectation that I'm developing, and I'm looking for that kind of service level as well in everything that I do. So am I going to go where things are easy, or am I going to put myself through the pain and punishment of modern tools because that's the way it's been?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jake, and I think you both bring up such a wide spectrum of examples, all the way from the hot playgrounds and up to the problems that Dennis is facing. So I think this is such a sort of a global issue for most cities, and this is what we see when we do these events too. That the challenges are very much the same in the small in a small Norwegian municipality of 10,000 inhabitants as it is in Jake's context or in Dennis' context. It's of course
Right.
different practical examples, but the issue is the same. We don't really know. And I mean, an obvious example is something that most municipalities are facing: the building permit issues. Yeah, we know that there's somebody applying for a building permit on this open area next to our house, but we have no idea of how to follow this process. We have no idea of how to engage in this process, and this is probably the most common of issues that we see in Nordic municipalities, at least. That we first, when the machines are rolling in to build this building, that's when the citizen actually start to engage, because they're wondering, the hell is going on here? What are they building? Because there's been this process of 1, 2, 3 years of this permit, and then it doesn't really surface until we see the machines rolling in next to our house, you know. So just by informing and building these clearer channels on the way, I think we have such an opportunity of saving money, of saving energy, and as you say, Jake, of creating a sort of a positive experience instead of this sort of negativity. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I would kind of end us on. I'm seeing that we're coming up to the hour, but you know, the reason I'm glad you invited me is to share from a designer's perspective before we jump into the city perspective is, you know, a principle that we do in design thinking is ask yourself the 5 whys. Why does it have to be this way? And ask it 4 more times. Root cause analysis. Find out why things are taking place. If you ever want a really fun example, there's a company out of San Francisco called IDEO, that did this exercise with a shopping cart, of all things. Just take the most boring, average object you can think of and determine, is there a way to do this better? And the answer was yes. There's absolutely better ways to do these things. I think a designer's touch can go a long way in helping to create better cities, smarter cities, more efficient cities, and the way that we communicate.
I think that's a good ending note, Jake. Thank you. It's been a really interesting morning so far, I think. And in about 15 minutes, we're gonna let Oslo into the discussion here. I think Werner is ready with some guests in Oslo. But up until 10:15, we're gonna let everyone have a quick 15 minutes to get some coffee or to do whatever is needed. Thanks again, Jake, for joining us. If you want to stick around, you do so, but I also understand if you want to go to bed. It's, what is it, 1 a.m.?
1 a.m.
Over at your place?
Yep.
Yeah, 1 a.m. It's about time to go to bed then, Jake, I guess. But thanks again for joining us. Dennis, we'll see you later too. And Werner, you're ready in 15 minutes, yeah?
We are ready, and I think Jake laid the ground really good for our next speakers. So we'll talk about digital participation. And Jake, I think I noted like 10 quotes from you. So really interesting perspective you gave us, and it will resonate, as Dennis said, to what we are doing daily. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon in about 12 minutes, maybe.